Please remain standing for Lift Every Voice and Sing. Thank you, Evan. Now we will pledge of allegiance.
Please form me to pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation. Thank you.
Please be seated. Certainly want to thank Pastor Stewart for his meaningful invocation, Evan Pittman for his rendition of the national anthem, and Lift Every Voice and Sing. And thank you, Mr. Prince, Dennis Prince, for leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Let's give them all a round of applause. Thank you so much. Last year, during our MLK celebration here at the American Legion Post 65, a challenge was announced by Senior Pastor of First Institutional Baptist Church, Dr. Reverend Warren H. Stewart, Sr. Alan Powell heard that challenge, accepted that challenge, and immediately went into action and galvanized the appropriate leaders, educators, top organizations, and community luminaries in the Valley who joined him in that challenge and agreed to bring their talent and resources to the table to effect change. Now hear me on this. Not one single citizen was charged one single penny to participate in all of these programs. Not one. Again, that challenge was accepted, and it will be exhibited in this video. You don't want to miss this. Please turn your attention to the screen.
I'm going to give you an assignment, and I hope you will have made progress on it by King Day 2020. Here's the assignment. I want you to lift, lower, smooth, and straighten, starting with zip code 8504. Mr. Hamilton, this is zip code 8504. And I'm giving you an assignment on this King Day that you will lift, lower, smooth, and straighten wherever you live. Paradise Valley, Moon Valley, Casa Grande, wherever you live, I'm giving you an assignment because every one of you here can contribute to lifting, lowering, smoothing, and straightening right here in zip code 85040. This zip code is the most historically African-American and Latino zip code in our state. There's history here. At one time, most of the African-Americans in Phoenix had to live in this zip code because there was segregated housing and neighborhoods. The median income in this district is significantly lower than any other zip code in this state. it is about $31,000. And for a family of 4, that is either in the poverty level or it's just above it. The test scores in the public schools here are below average. Virtually all of the schools in this district are close to failing when the schools are tested. The largest concentration of African Americans have lived in this district, and it is above the state average. It has one of the highest crime rates in the city of Phoenix. It has more renters here than homeowners, than many other zip codes. It has the highest rate of formerly incarcerated people who get out of prison, they come back to 85040. It has one of the lowest rates of African Americans registered to vote in zip code 85040. And it has one of the highest mortality rates of African Americans in the entire county. African Americans lead 7 of 8 reasons for mortality. Even though we're only 5% of the population of the county, we lead in 7 of 8 reasons why people die. The only one we don't lead in is suicide. I want to challenge you. This is your assignment. That you, everybody in here, you've heard just some of the statistics of this neighborhood. That you lift lower, smooth, and straighten, so that some of these statistics have been changed by 12 months from this day. Thank you, AP, for all you do in Hero, Arizona. Thank you, Travis L. Williams, American Legion Post 65, for all that you do. And for all of the leaders who are here, all the community people who are here, thank you for taking time out of your King Day celebration afternoon to be here and to share with us.
Thank you, Reverend Stewart, for that challenge. I just want to add, challenge was given, challenge was accepted, and immediate action was taken. So thank you, AP, and thank you for those that joined you in responding to that challenge. Now, on our agenda, we have Harold Branch III. We call him HB. He's a speaker, trainer, entrepreneur, and poet originally from the west side of Chicago, but a proud Phoenix resident. His life story was featured in an MTV documentary, and he is the founder of one of the country's largest open mic poetry events called Home Base Poetry. To share a piece he wrote back in 1999 called I Can't Breathe, 1999. Please welcome HB.
Good morning, everyone. As it was said, I wrote this poem back in 1999 when I was a student at Arizona State, and it's unfortunate how real it still is today, and I pray that in 20 plus years, in 10 years, in 5 years, in 2 years, we'll do the work necessary so it won't be relevant anymore. I can't breathe. The bow of racism is constricting me, preventing me from living to my full potential, convicting me on premises that are inconsequential, like my vehicle. Being mental is fundamental for surviving. You have to be complex because the simple brothers are dying, relying on sex and drugs to get them to the next step until they become the victim of low self-esteem and a loss of breath. I can't breathe. The asthma of police got me gasping. All I have to do is exist, and they're harassing, laughing, asking me questions with disrespect as if they want a negative reaction so they can have an excuse to blast in my chest. With bullets my taxes paid for. Grateful when they pass me and don't harass me like they did me a favor. So I tend to put my head back and relax in this minute victory savor. But these officers got me looking for air, huffing and puffing as if I was in labor. I can't breathe, but my heart bleeds like a blind man without braille and the need to read. I fail to believe that I'll be respected for my color or my creed. Some don't see that I breathe for my mother and my seed. Survival is my lover, and we just had a daughter named Succeed. Similar to the leaves, I wonder where this breeze would lead me. The sun sees me as the wind breathes me and exhales destiny. I surrender my mind to the right hand of God and give his left the rest of me. But some still attempt to unrightfully arrest my respiratory, squeeze my lungs empty and suffocate the spirits with me, make the air thick with oppression so inhalation is impossible, put me in foul situations, make explanations unimaginable. Got a gun obsession and unprotected living is casual. I love money, but study habits are less than admirable. Actually, like landing airplanes, we're on a gradual dissension. We're our own competition, and we're losing. Constantly choosing decisions that will hurt me and lead to my mental, spiritual, and ultimately physical death. As if Jackie Joyner Kersee was escaping my lungs, I'm running out of breath. I feel like the sun rise because I'm always mourning. Crying for my brothers and sisters because it seemed like we stopped growing. Like a backwards river, a ladder written from right to left. We're flowing the wrong way. And as a result, my blood flow is slowing. All the knowledge I previously had, I'm no longer knowing. My chest is tightening, my veins are showing, and as fast as multifaceted death is coming, my motivation for living is going. As a complete being, my internal systems no longer have what they need. Somebody hurry and help me, cuz I can't breathe. Peace.
Thank you, HB, for that piece. Now we have a special guest from Maricopa County District 3. Please join me in welcoming County Supervisor Bill Gates. Let's give him a round of applause.
Good morning, everyone. As the member of the Board of Supervisors who voted to require each and every one of you to wear a mask in Maricopa County, I'm going to go ahead and leave my mask on this morning. Thank you so much, AP, for inviting me to be here today. This is an incredible group of individuals, and I'm truly inspired by what I've already heard, and I know that I'm going to be inspired throughout the morning. It really, really is a special, special event. So thank you so much. So many friends here, so many great leaders across the county, and across the state, but I wanted to make sure to recognize my partner at Maricopa County, our Sheriff, Paul Penzone. Sheriff, thanks for all that you do. And thanks for all that the members of the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office do for all of us here in Maricopa County. So I do represent District 3 on the Board of Supervisors. That includes Moon Valley, Sunny Slope, and also Northeast Phoenix. But before, and I actually represent most of the city of Phoenix on the Board of Supervisors. But before that, I served on the Phoenix City Council for 7 years, and it was a true honor to serve on the City Council. And over the years, I participated in many public meetings where folks have come and they've spoken about discrimination in our community. And I've listened. And people have come to these public meetings and they've talked about systemic racism in law enforcement. And I've listened. But I didn't hear it. And I didn't take the action and I didn't ask the questions that I should have during that time. Now, this is a very important time in our country, and during those meetings at the Phoenix City Council, I heard the stories of many individuals. Romaine Brisbane, Michelle Cousseau, and I also recall an incident from March of 2010. Now, back in March of 2010, I was a new city councilman, and frankly, I was in awe of my colleagues on the city council, including my colleague, Michael Johnson. Now, Michael Johnson was someone who many of you, he is someone who many of you know in this room. And Michael, I'm so impressed by him. He seemingly understands and knows his district block by block. In fact, back in 2009, he took me on a ride-along, took me all around his district, showed me all of the projects that he had worked on. And as you can imagine, Michael was very proud of that, because for those of you who know Michael, you know that he loves District 8. And so that really had an impact on me. But then in March of 2010, one early morning, Michael Johnson was in his house, and he was awoken by lights and sirens. He went outside of his house, and he saw that his neighbor's house was on fire. So he asked a fire official who was nearby, could he go over and check on his neighbor? And the fire official said, absolutely, go over there. And he was going over to check on his neighbor. He was stopped by a white police officer. And that officer pushed him back about 20 feet. Now, Michael explained to this officer, he said, the fire official said I could go over there. But the officer wouldn't let him go. So then Michael said, may I speak to your supervisor? And this officer said, that's not how we do things here. And then he took Michael Johnson and he threw him to the ground. He threw him to the ground and he handcuffed him. And Michael Johnson laid on the ground for 10 minutes. Michael Johnson, a veteran of the Phoenix Police Department and a long-serving Phoenix City Councilman, laid on the ground. And for what? Being black? When I saw the video of George Floyd, just like many of you around the world, something changed in me. And I started to think again about those stories that I had heard during those public meetings. Those stories that I had listened to. I started to view them in a different way. I started to view what happened to Michael Johnson in a different way. When George Floyd was in the final moments of his life, he asked for air. And the officer refused. And as a result, he lost his life. But we cannot refuse to listen. We cannot refuse to hear, and we cannot refuse to take action. This is one of those moments in our lives. Now, given the peaceful demonstrations that have gone on in this country for the past few weeks, it is clear that it is time for an honest conversation about how law enforcement interacts with our community, particularly with people of color. Again, I am honored to be here today, and I look forward to participating in this conversation with you all. I look forward to hearing from you, truly hearing what you have to say, and working with you to forge a path forward. If we can do that, if we can have an honest civil discussion here in Phoenix, the 5th largest city in the country, and in Maricopa County, the 4th largest county in the country, then we can start to heal. And we can serve as a model for the rest of the country. At the end of his life, when George Floyd asked for air, the officer refused to listen. We cannot refuse to listen. We cannot refuse to hear. We cannot refuse to take action, and we cannot refuse to change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Supervisor Gates. Our next special guest is the President and CEO of the Arizona Chamber of Commerce and Industry, With over a decade plus of leadership at the Chamber, he serves as the chair of the United States Chamber of Commerce's Committee of 100, where he represents the Arizona business community on the national stage. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Glenn Hammer. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And after Supervisor Gates' beautiful words, I don't want to get in trouble for taking my mask off either. I want to thank my good friend A.P. Powell for his leadership over the years of really teaching so many of us in this room. The Bridge Forum, A Time for Change, this isn't something that was just developed after the tragic murder of George Floyd. This is something that A.P. Powell has been working on for many years, and the time is now. And I want to thank Pastor Stewart. I'm just a Jewish guy from New York, but I'll tell you, every time I hear your prayers, I learn, and it reaches my soul. And you are always urging us to be better human beings and to work together. And Reverend, I believe we're at that moment in time where we can all do that. And as the man who brought the Martin Luther King Day Jr. holiday to Arizona, this is one of those moments in time where Arizona, again, can and must lead the way. In the introduction, it was mentioned that as the chair of the U.S. Chamber's Committee of 100, that's the top 100 chambers in the country, including great chambers like the Greater Phoenix Chamber of Commerce, we're going to, on Thursday, be putting together via the U.S. Chamber a major event that will highlight the inequality of opportunity. And as has been said earlier today, words are words. The point of this effort will be to take those words and to put them into action. And the four major areas are education, employment, entrepreneurship, and criminal justice reform. And I would encourage all of those. We have over 500 chambers and trade associations across the United States that are participating in this effort. And it's going to be live streamed. If you go to uschamber.com, you can get more details. But it's going to be 10:30 to 12:30 our time this Thursday, and it's going to be a great program. My final comments is that this is a major American moment. The Arizona Chamber of Commerce and Industry, we want to be part of the solution, but we can only be part of the solution if we're listening and learning. And I'm just blessed to know A.P. Powell, who has been someone who has been enlightening me for many years, and I know that with his help and with everyone here in the room, we will make a big difference. And I want to thank our incoming chair, Don Crove, who will be taking over July 1st for being here today, because I just want to again stress that we're here to listen, to learn, and please hold us accountable. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Mr. Hammer. Okay, before we get to our first panel, we're going to have two short video presentations. The first is from the mayor of the fifth largest city in the United States, Mayor Kate Gallego. She is also the second elected female in Phoenix history and the youngest big city mayor in our nation. The second video is from Congressman Greg Stanton from the 9th Congressional District. He served as the mayor of Phoenix from 2012 to 2018 until he resigned to run for Congress and started his tenure as a congressman in 2018. Please turn your attention toward the screen.
Hello, I'm Phoenix Mayor Kate Gallego. Thank you so much to the Bridge Forum for convening such an important dialogue. So many leading Arizonans are joining today to be part of this conversation. I feel that we are blessed to be serving in a unique moment in American history where I feel that solutions that were never possible before are possible, and that The people who need to be part of a dialogue to have systemic change are participating. I'm optimistic that Arizona can lead the way and develop stronger relationships that make sure that Phoenix and our state is a safe place for everyone to call home. Good luck with these important conversations today.
I'm Congressman Greg Stanton. Welcome to today's Bridge Forum on the important subject of a time for a change. I've had a chance to work closely with Alan Powell and the team at Arizona from the very first Bridge Forum. I find it to be very valuable, bringing people together from different backgrounds and perspectives to try to find common ground on important issues. I'm really happy that Dr. Benjamin Chavis has taken the time to be the moderator of today's event. He's one of the leading civil rights leaders in our country, and he himself suffered the injustices of our criminal justice system when he unfortunately and unfairly spent years in prison as a result of prosecutorial misconduct. These are serious times. We've seen recently the murder of George Floyd, the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, the murder of Breonna Taylor, and others. And we've learned more than ever before that Black lives matter. That's the reason why this week I'll be voting yes in Washington, D.C. on the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which will make some very important reforms and build more accountability into policing in the United States of America. Banning chokeholds, banning no-knock warrants, improving our qualified immunity system so people can be held more accountable for violating people's civil rights. It will build a national database. There's a lot more information about officers and potential officer misconduct. And I know our country is ready for these important reforms because we need to build more confidence in policing and build greater police community trust. So today's topic is very timely. Thanks, Arizona, and Alan Powell and the whole team for putting on another outstanding Bridge Forum.
Thank you, Mayor Gallego, and thank you, Congressman Stanton. Let's just give them a round of applause for their support by video. Now to our first panel. We have our panelists seated. I will introduce them all. Please hold your applause until I introduce them all, and then I will bring up our moderator. First, we have someone who has played 14 years in the NBA and is the current general manager of the Phoenix Suns, Mr. James Jones. We have a superintendent of Roosevelt School District number 66, Dr. Quentin Boyce. We also have superintendent of Phoenix Union High School, Dr. Chad Getson. The president of the NAACP Arizona State Conference, Mr. Charles Faniel. The founder of the brand Lolo's Chicken and Waffles, Mr. Larry White. And the senior pastor of First Institutional Baptist Church, Reverend Dr. Warren H. Stewart. Let's give our panelists applause for joining us today. And now let's get to the core of why we're here today. It is my distinct honor to introduce our moderator for today. His bio is too extensive for me to properly introduce him, so I'll just share a few things. Dr. Benjamin F. Chavis, Jr. in his youth was an assistant to Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., who inspired him to work in the civil rights movement. In 1980, he became the vice president of the National Council of Churches. He was the national director of the Million Man March and is currently president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association. Now please me in welcoming Dr. Ben Chavis. Give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. And since we are live streaming, I want to say to all of the listening audience, not only here in Phoenix and across the state of Arizona, but across the United States of America, this is another day that the Lord has made. And we do have cause to pause a moment to try to get some resolution to the issues affecting not only the black community, but all communities, but particularly the issues that affect policing in our communities. I want to thank all the panelists for coming out and thank all the program. Let's give our MC, he's done a great job, a hand for thus far. Thank you so much. I just want to start out with being very honest. There's only one man living in America that could get me to fly across the United States from Washington, D.C. to Phoenix to moderate this panel, and that's A.P. Powell. Let's give A.P. Powell a hand. He's understated and sometimes undervalued. This brother is not only a tremendous service to veterans across the country. But every time I talk to AP on the phone, which is regular, he's telling me about Phoenix. He's telling me about this community. Every community has problems. What happened to George Floyd is not isolated to what is going on here in Phoenix. What happened to Raynard Brooks, even after George Floyd, is not isolated to Atlanta. I want to thank that brother for the poem written in 1999. I Can't Breathe. Eric Garner was choked to death in New York City for selling Lucy cigarettes. And before he died, he said, I can't breathe. I'm honored to be in your presence because as moderator, I want to hear from everybody, and then we're going to have a panel on policing. But I really just want to say that the outcome of today, the outcome of this dialogue, the results of this interchange, this engagement, has to be what it is we all will agree to do to improve the quality of life for all the people of Phoenix, for all the people of Arizona, and for all the people of America. And I would say, at this moment in history, this is just not an American problem. It's all over the world. And I want to give a shout out to all those young people in this city and all those young people across America, all those young people, and then not so young, but I know some young people got their parents also to march. This is just not Pastor Stewart, a moment. This is a movement. Some of you know I worked at, I was the youngest staff person for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And I tell people I work with Dr. King, and say, well, man, how old are you? I was 14 years old. I was the youngest staff person for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in my home state of North Carolina. I grew up in the Civil Rights Movement. And while we can point to things that have happened over the last 10 years, over the last 20 years, over the last 30 years, over the last 40 years, I like to point to something over 50 years ago. It pained me on that day, April 4th, as it pained all of Black America and all Americans when Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis on April 4th, 1968. And as a result of his assassination, there were uprisings, there were civil unrest, there were riots. So much so, the federal government called for a study commission. Not only why was there civil unrest, but what were some recommendations to prevent what happened in '68 from recurring as we moved into the 1970s. You recall in 1968, President Nixon was also elected. And he and Spiro Agnew, who was a former governor of Maryland, ran on a law and order campaign. So 50 years ago. The point I want to bring out, I want to put in your library. You should get a copy. It's online. The Kerner Commission report, Kerner. And in 1969, the Kerner Commission reported, after a blue ribbon committee of distinguished Americans and researchers and scholars, they asked the question and they got an answer. Brother Malcolm used to say, if you want the right answer, ask the right question. The question was asked, what was the leading element that caused civil unrest in America in 1968? You know what the answer was? Police brutality. Number one. When later, some decades later, when the videotape caught the Los Angeles Police Department beating Rodney King, everybody knew that the LAPD was doing it, but it was the videotape that captured momentarily the consciousness of our nation. Now, I'm the moderator. I didn't come to make a speech, but I'm opening up. What happened to George Floyd was a vivid reminder that we not only have not done our homework, our schoolwork, our community work, our policing work in an effective manner for decades. The good news is, as I've not just studied the movement, I've lived the movement, I see something happening in America that I think is very positive. When white people start saying Black Lives Matter, when non-black people start saying Black Lives Matter, that's important. We're not saying that other lives, all lives, yes, all lives matter. That's never been a debate. But it has been a debate whether or not Black lives matter. Even here in Phoenix, in Arizona. When people say, well, Ben, why are you going out to Arizona? I said, man, first AP called me. But secondly, I can't think of a better place. In truth, to all the elected officials here, this city has the real potential to provide a glimpse of the future of America. That's why as moderator, I'm going to lay it heavy on our panelists in both panels. Because we have to come out of here today not with a long shopping list of things. If we can come out with one thing or two things that we can just agree on that we're going to do after this bridge forum. The whole purpose of the bridge forum is to bridge our divisiveness. Our colleagues in Southern Africa faced a moment similar to this when they were trying to dismantle apartheid. After all of the marches, all the demonstrations, after all the brutalities, it came a kairos moment where there could be no turning back. We're at that moment and movement in the United States of America. This city is one of the fastest growing cities in America. It's one of the most diverse places in America. If we can find a solution here, it will help other brothers and sisters around the country. That's why I'm so grateful and thankful to AP for providing me an opportunity to come. I just want to say one thing just for the record, since it was noted in my introduction. I know a little something about the criminal justice system from my own personal experience. Because of my involvement in the civil rights movement all my life, I've been arrested 67 times. I've been incarcerated in the state prison, federal prison, and in all 6 or 7 cases, I was ultimately found not guilty, but not after having served in almost a decade in prison unjustly. It's hard to overturn a conviction. And so people ask me, man, you've been through all that. Why are you still in the movement? And I'll be careful when I talk to young people because I don't want to discourage people. I don't want you to think that the movement for freedom and justice is all about suffering. It's all about the hardship. It's all about the pain. It is about that, but it's not about that alone. In the Bible and in the Quran, it says that trial and tribulation is for purification. That means Americans ought to be the most purified people in the world because we've been through trials and tribulations, particularly black folks. But Dr. King taught us, and I've grown up with this, not to be bitter because bitter only distorts the beholder. So I come to Phoenix today optimistic. Why? Because I believe there's a God that's above all of this. And I believe that those of us of faith and those of us who may not be of faith, and there are different faiths, we're not to judge one another's faith, but we ought to work together. panel, the issue is, and I have some questions for the community panel, but after we hear from you and after we hear from the police panel, the question is, how can both panels work together? Because ultimately, this is just not a problem for the police. It's just not a problem for the community. It's a problem for the community and the police and all of us to work together to resolve. It is a life and death issue. And I think we should always choose life over death. It is right and wrong. I think we should always choose righteousness over wrong. We should always choose fairness over unfairness. And so we're here today not to put anybody on trial. We're here today to seek a togetherness in the resolution to come up with our action item or items. How we're going to work together and stay together. Dr. Stewart, this zip code 85040, the scripture says, what you do unto the least of these, you do also unto me. So if 85040 is the zip code of the least of these, we are in the right place to have this discussion. Out of this crucible can come and should come and will come some solutions that we all can participate in. So let's start out. I'm going to ask the panel, let me start over here. What has struck you, brother, about the difference in all of the demonstrations that are going on? Are they the same or are they different? But from your perspective, what's different about this day and time and place in Phoenix?
First, giving honor to God, all the lead officials that's here. Thank you for having me. What I have seen being the difference, I think people are actually waking up this time around. People's eyes are wide open. And I think that this time around, we can make a difference. And, you know, making a difference starts in the home. So, you know, everybody has feelings. All races, we all got feelings. And love starts at home. And we teach our daughters, our children, our grandchildren to love everybody, to treat everybody with respect. A lot of you guys know me. I am Larry White Jr., Lolo's Chicken and Waffles, but I'm also Mrs. White's grandson. I'm Mrs. White's first grandbaby. And since I was able to walk and talk, my grandmother taught me to respect everybody that walked through that door, no matter what race, creed, religion. You know, there was people, Jehovah's Witnesses, and people from different denominations that would come through the door, and they would preach to us. And my grandma's a pastor. But you smile, you listen, and if you don't have nothing nice to say, you don't say nothing at all. But it was a respect level that my grandma instilled in me as a young man to respect one another. So we all need to respect one another, and we all can learn a lot from that.
All right, respect. I like your enthusiasm that this is the moment to get something done.
This is the moment. Yes, sir.
A second question. How do you think the Arizona business community feels about what is happening in the streets?
I mean, well, I think the business community understands that it's our responsibility to address issues. You know, I can only speak from personal experience. I've thought about this a lot. You know, my profession as a professional athlete afforded me a ton of privilege, a ton of visibility, and sorry, can I use yours? Thank you. For the most part, we've always used that visibility for our own means. It's to sell a product. It's to take something from the community. finances, resources to build our empires, so to speak. And I think this is different. And I use this example that I had the other day. As an athlete, ex-athlete, for 14 years, I was always acknowledged as an athlete. I was always acknowledged for what I could do. I was always acknowledged for the brand. And since this George Floyd movement, I found myself no longer being acknowledged for what I do or what I did, but I'm acknowledged for being black. And, you know, as an executive for a franchise that impacts the community, that is in the community, but more so relies on this community for its existence, this is different because I see people expecting businesses to lead the charge, to be present, to make change. And so I know it's the business community's responsibility and more our privilege to actually change things.
Thank you very much. NAACP. With the history of some of Arizona's polarizing political figures and being one of the last states to recognize the MLK holiday, can the Arizona community lead change in the area of race relations? What steps need to be taken, particularly from your vantage point of the NAACP?
Well, first of all, I want to give a shout out to AP for putting on this awesome program, and to all of the panelists here, and respect to the Almighty Creator. I think that what needs to be done, we need to be serious about having honest conversations with each other and admit that there is systemic racism here well, it's all across the country. And for 401 years, we've had it. You know, we've had all kinds of isms. So if we come together and support one another and admit our wrongs, try to put some positive changes and change policies to respect one another and treat each and every one like we want to be treated, I think we can do a better job. Arizona has a unique history, going back 3 decades. You know, there was a young man that back, some of you may remember, Edward Mallet, okay? 3 decades ago, uttered the same words, "I can't breathe." Y'all remember him, Edward Mallet? Double amputee, right here in Phoenix, Arizona. Another young man, Rick Rankins, didn't have a job trying to feed his family. Stole some food at Smitty's, okay? Tried to take a ham home to feed his family. Got killed in the parking lot. So, 8504, I've lived in this zip code, okay? 1960, I lived 2 blocks down the street. I currently go to church 4 blocks down the street. And I currently reside half a mile down the street. So we have a rich history here. Some serious issues in Arizona have been going on for years.
Thank you very much. I just want to point out one thing. While we make references to the history, we cannot change the history. We have to learn from the history. I think with all of the memory that's been cited, that memory alone ought to compel us to do whatever it takes to prevent these kind of situations from recurring. And I think one of the reasons why people are excited now about the movement that's happening across the country, and in solidarity now, people are marching all over the world, in solidarity for the call here. Just last week, members of the Congress introduced a legislation, Justice in Policing Act. And when the police panel, we will comment on it, but I just want to bring to everybody's attention there are some moves in Washington to try to come up with remedies. My thing about being here in Phoenix today is that whatever the remedy is offered, it has to be inclusive of everybody. I don't think the community can solve the police problem, and I don't think the police can solve the community's problem. But I believe the police and the community together can solve our common problems. And I think that's what we want to really come out of this bridge forum is not only reminding us of these tragedies, which we never should lose our memory, because memory can inform what we do in the present. But I really think that Phoenix has an opportunity today to help shape the future, to help bring it into being. But the dialogue has been called for is very important. We have to be honest about it, candid about it. And I know back in the 60s, we did not have video phones. We did not have iPhones. And the media was a little different than what was covered and how it was covered. Today, there are a lot of people who can't distinguish between real news and fake news, or inaccurate recording versus accurate recording. And so sometimes there's a debate about what is real and what's not real. But I think by having these forums like this, we come closer not only to perceiving what is real and what needs to be done, but really get to do it. So the next question is, young people and students are often the heartbeat of social change. And they have been very present in the present protests. As students get ready to start back to school, how can their voices continue to be included in the discussions? Mic check.
Like my first comment is we have no choice, and I think that's a good thing. That this generation is not going to sit back passively. As we launch, as we move into the future, this generation we have seen march the streets and use their voices. And it reminds me of an opportunity I had post-Charlottesville. I asked the principal of South Mountain High School here in the community to give me 10 students I just want to meet with, and I want to understand what does it feel like today to be a teenager and watch Charlottesville on social media and on the news. And I spent an hour with a group of 15 students, and one young woman looked at me and she said, "Can I tell you how I really feel?" She said, "Our generation is both scared and pissed off." She says, "We're scared because we thought we were growing up in a nation that preached equality, that preached all are created equal." And she said, "But we're mad because your generation hands us a textbook that says the civil rights movement occurred decades ago and was solved. And what we watch on social media and on the news is contrary to what you put in our hands. Contrary to what was put in our hands every single day." And so I do think that history is important for us to tell. I agree with you that we must look to the future, but as we think about involving students in the launch of school, it's also about making sure that our kids have access to the right curriculum, that our kids can actually understand the root of the problem today. I've heard a lot of scripture quoted already this morning. In the 11th chapter of Romans, it says that when the root of a tree is holy, so are the branches. And the reality is that what that also alludes to is that when the root of a tree is evil, so are the branches. And for us to really understand why there's unrest today, we must be willing to talk about and get at the root of the problem. And I think this generation will not stop until we get there.
Thank you. Dr. Boyce, same question.
Thank you for having me. So I get the privilege of working with all of our young people right here in the zip code 85040 41 and 42. And one thing that I've been very excited to see is how resilient, how there's such a grit and determination. When you look at the peaceful protests that have happened here locally, like you're looking at young people. I think about me at their age, and I will confess, I wasn't that amazing. I didn't do what I see our young people do today. And so they definitely have to be a part of the movement. They already are a part of the movement, which is incredibly encouraging. I have three kids of my own, and I just recently shared within our Roosevelt community. The thing that's really difficult for me right now is not so much that I continue to get stopped and profiled. Even though like I'm a pretty smart guy, it still happens to me. The really tough thing is that I still have to have those same conversations with my little people, my kids, and my students that my parents had with me and their parents before then. My grandma just turned 92 last week. She's a Great Depression baby. She is a strong-willed, tough old lady who will probably outlive us all. And she's seen a lot. And so I know over the course of history, there have been movements, ebbing and flowing. And I think what's super unique about right now is that in the era, as mentioned before, of technology, like this stuff didn't just start happening, but now everybody can see it. And what happened to George Floyd didn't happen in a vacuum. It's part of a bigger issue when you talk about systematic oppression, and to watch a person get executed live changes people. And so our young people, like his kids will have that video forever. And I know how it made me feel. And I know how it makes our young people feel. And you can't unsee that. It's one thing to read it. It's one thing to hear about it. But you can't unsee that. And so our young people, they're going to be relentless. They have to be. And the really cool opportunity, Black Lives Matter, that was talked about earlier. You know, that movement's not quite 10 years old. Thinking about when Trayvon Martin was killed. Used to be such a polarizing statement. As you mentioned, by saying it, it was equated to the fact that other lives didn't. And we know that not to be true. But a week ago, PetSmart emailed me. PetSmart told me Black Lives Matter. It's become such a more comfortable moniker, which for me becomes such an opportunity. This isn't a black people issue. This is an everybody issue. And unless everybody is united, I don't want to waste the movement. And so our young people will be amazing. They've already have, and they will continue to be.
Thank you very much. Dr. Stewart, the faith community has often played a strategic role in bringing people together and actually leading the movement for change. Does the faith community have a role in helping the protesters of today to be heard, to be felt, and so that their actions and so their anxieties and their aspirations are not out there in vain, that something will lead to change as a result of this new round of activism, but the role of the faith community?
Thank you, Dr. Shavers.
prophetic books from Isaiah to Malachi, and even Jesus Christ launched his ministry. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, has anointed me to preach good news to the poor, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to recover the sight to the blind. So his ministry was about justice, about liberation. And so what we have to do is somehow come alongside of the young people who are doing an awesome job and try to interweave and interject a spiritual element that this is even bigger than what you are doing. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you very much. You know, I'm here representing the black press today, and the black press also grew out of the church. Yes. You know, Coach, I'm going to just ask you this final question before we talk about next steps. How do you feel professional athletes using their platform to affect change in the current environment?
It's imperative that we use our platforms for visibility. I think you see right now there's a difference between athletes like myself that are 40 plus and the athletes that are 22, 23. Coming from a black community as a kid, I experienced everything that these kids are experiencing today, but my platform of professional sports took me away from the streets. And so re-educating myself allows me to be able to actually do something. Our younger guys, these 22-year-olds, these 25-year-old, 30-year-old athletes are being able to give visibility to the pain. They're able to amplify the voices of the streets and the people who are actually living it. You know, it's the only way. Like I look at it from a standpoint where coming back into the community from which I grew up, I try to avoid the pain. Like you grew up being discriminated against. You grew up being targeted. You know, you didn't want to come back to your neighborhood in a nice car because you felt like you get pulled over because you watched people in your neighborhood who had great things be harassed. You don't belong here. And so this younger generation, because they're connected, these young athletes are saying, I wasn't too far away from that, and I can sense that, I can feel that, like that's me. And because they are closer to this generation of youngsters, they're comfortable saying like, you know what, I trust you, you are me. And our athletes are saying, look, let me be your voice. Let me be your platform. You know, that humility that they're expressing is something that, honestly, guys like myself who made it out, you wrestle with because you want to be the voice. You want to be the face. And that's not the case. Like, we have to re-educate ourselves to understand. And that re-education takes so long where sometimes the movement and the opportunity passes. So I commend all athletes, all of these guys from Kaepernick, who are saying it's bigger than me, and I'll be, like I said, the platform for the movement.
Very good. Thank you so much. We want to make a transition, but we want to discuss next steps. I'm sure many of you have thought about this panel and today's forum. What is the most important next step? Dr. Stewart, I'll start with you and we'll come down. What is the, you know, not a laundry list, but what is the next important step to take? Thank you very much.
Thank you for asking me. I have to say this. Supervisor Bill Gates, you gave me hope today. Several of us have been in meetings with white political leaders who had an R behind their name, who asked us to meet with them about what we could do about this systemic racism. When we challenge those at the highest office in this state, will you be courageous? Will you become a courageous leader and acknowledge systemic racism and say that you will be a crusader to eradicate it? We talked to a group of white evangelical megachurch pastors, asked them the same question. All of them stuttered and stumbled first on what systemic racism is, and none of them said they would become a leader. You said today, based on what you saw happen to Councilman Michael Johnson, you said today that systemic racism is real, it's a problem, and it must be eradicated. Until white governmental leaders in high places will be courageous and bold and tell the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people over who they have charge, influence, that this is a problem that has existed long enough. We have to change it. We cannot let this pass. So I hope that you gave me hope to be a white elected government official with an R behind your name. And I hope you would say what you said, not just in here, but wherever you go, because we had a meeting yesterday and the person passed who called us. We want to talk to you about what we can do. And when we presented them with systemic racism, they passed. So I want to say, can we give Mr. Gates a hand?
Absolutely. Thank you. And keep in mind, brothers and sisters, that we're alive. Tens of thousands of people are watching this, listening to this, feeling what has been articulated here today. And we not only have to applaud Brother Gates for what he said, we need to encourage other political leaders so his voice is not the lone voice in Phoenix. Not only affirming that systemic racism exists, but hey, let us work together to end this sin, if I could use a theological term. When all of God's children are not treated the same, that's not God's fault. That's our fault. We fall short. And when we fall short, we have to have courage and faith to admit that we have fallen short. We need more voices. So one of the steps, Pastor Stewart, if I hear you, is people who are hopeless can be given hope if they hear from those in positions of high authority and influence that they acknowledge what is going on and pledge to be involved in leadership to help bring about that change. I want to see that video that's not in the media enough. In some cities, some police officers in uniform kneeled with the people, marched with the people. But you don't see that video much. The video that established media puts out there is always the confrontations between the community and the police. We need politicians, police officers, community leaders, church leaders, business leaders, from all walks of life, NAACP, Urban League, all of us together, marching together, resolving and planning and implementing actions that will sustain the hope. Because a lot of times, hope shouldn't just be something that lasts for a day. You know, our educators talk about what the children feel that they're not getting adequate truth in the textbooks or in education. We've got to do something about the curriculum in real time. And, you know, this pandemic, as tragic and as deathly as the pandemic is, we should take the opportunity that amidst the pandemic and amidst the epidemic of systemic racism, we can get something done. The school systems are going to be changed as a result of this pandemic. But I would caution that whatever is done in the future We have to learn from the past. We have to do better than yesterday, tomorrow. That's what's at stake. Other next steps. Yes, brother.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'll be quick. I'll just say three things, and one echoes Reverend. I know that some really important people in this room, and we all have a sphere of influence. So I know even within education, there are things that we're doing to move the narrative forward, whether it is working with our people, our adults that are in front of young people, and making sure they are culturally sensitive and trained and understand, or looking at materials that demonstrates representation from students that we serve. So within your sphere of influence and control, what are you doing? It's a rhetorical question, but also the next step. The other thing that I'd be remiss if I don't mention is obviously vote. This is one of the few places in the world where, and you can unpack voter suppression and incarceration felonies which prevent people from, so there are issues there, but in theory, this is one of the few places in the world where you can actually make change. And so we talked about the lack of number of people that are registered in the zip code, that there's just such an opportunity there. And then the final thing, which is really just a ditto, something that I heard probably over digesting the coverage of what's been happening the last month, is one of the best quotes I heard is that you are either racist or you're anti-racist. So you're either racist or anti-racist. There's nothing in between. You can't be a bystander. If you're a bystander, then you're racist. And so when I look around, there are people in this room that will, no matter how many degrees I got, there are certain tables I'll never be able to sit at. But there are people in this room that do have that access. And so you're either racist or you're anti-racist. So how do you push back when you're in places when there's a divergent majority perspective that is contrary to what we're talking about today? And that's a powerful next step.
Absolutely. If I understand what you're saying, we have an opportunity now for anti-racists to step up. Don't be in their column of not only the sin of commission, but the sin of omission. A racist is racist. But we all can be involved in anti-racist, anti-systemic racism, not only voicing, but our actions. Next steps.
So I had a few thoughts come to mind. First, I think I echo what you said earlier, but I think it's more than just people in positions of power. I think it's organizations and institutions of power. And we need institutions, Phoenix Union, one of them, but business and industry, being willing to come out and say things like Black Lives Matter, like we are an anti-racist institution, that we will stand with our community. And so I think it's people and organizations and institutions. And I think especially institutions like a school district, like a city that historically has contributed to the systemic racism in our nation. We this year in Phoenix Union celebrate our 125-year history. And when we decided to tell our history to our community, we told the real history. We said that we have both a beautiful and a broken history. And we told the brokenness and the segregation and the discrimination and the divisiveness that we created in our own system for over 100 years. And at the same time made a pledge that we will never be that institution again. And so I think it starts with, again, not just people, but companies of power. And then I want to echo another thing that Dr. Boyce mentioned about youth. We also need to build our youth. We need to build youth that are educated, that see themselves in the curriculum, that are empowered to do amazing things. And we must invest in them. When we talk about 85040, 85041, 85042, it is historically one of the most underinvested zip codes. Intentionally. We must do something about that. When we think about future expansion of business, we talk about issues of equity. We need economic equity as well. Dr. Boyce and I are very blessed in that we lead the school systems of South Phoenix. Phoenix Union expands beyond these zip codes, but We say often that the future of Black Arizona runs through Roosevelt and Phoenix Union. And if we're not investing heavily in 040 and 041 and 042, that we will not see dramatic change in the youth and in the future generations. And so it's not just about institutions, it's about investment. And it's about lifting up a generation that is willing to act if we're willing to let them.
Thank you. Next steps.
Well, thank you. I think that we need to seriously look at reforms. We need policy changes, serious policy changes, and overhaul of the current systems and policies. We have a broken system. We start with mass incarceration. We need reforms there. Law enforcement reforms. Opportunities for minority businesses. Corporations, the CEOs, they need to speak, have conversation with their employees. Provide opportunities for minorities to break through that glass ceiling. And first of all, I would like to give a shout out to the 2020 census. So important. Many of us do not know the importance of the 2020 census. And in spite of all the things that's going on now with the epidemic and these mass killings, we've forgotten about the 2020 census. The 2020 election. The most important election in the history of this country. We need to get serious about it, make sure that we focus on those two areas, and then we can follow back and change policy, eliminating and addressing racism and mass incarceration and all those other reforms. And
Thank you. Go next steps.
The panel, they touched on everything. The two things I would say is investment in the community on every level and voting on every level. I think a lot of times when we talk about voting, we talk on a national level, but we all know that things happen on the local community level. And so local elections, district elections, state elections, national elections, but we have to be serious about investing in this community and encouraging everyone, every age, to vote.
Very good. Next steps, good brother.
Voting is very important, of course. It starts at the head. But I want to go back to when I was a child and there was police officers, because I grew up in 85041, and my grandmother still lives in 85040. And I went to South Mountain High School. And the officers that walked the campus, we knew them. We knew them from school, and we knew them from outside of school. We need to hire officers from our community, Phoenix PD. They need to come and recruit and empower and uplift young children to want to grow up and be a part of the police department to infuse the change, you know, because a lot of America don't understand. What they don't understand, they fear. And we need to stop being policed by people that grew up fearing us, you know? So the police needs to get involved. I think there should be a committee, like a board of, you know, non-police officers, a governing board to police what the police do in their actions and hold those that do wrong, hold them accountable. That's the change that I think that we need to do. It starts from young, and we can build up. We can grow into it. It's a lot of parts. I know I'm all over the place, but start with the young.
Thank you very much. Let me ask before we transition to the next panel, all the panelists, would you be willing to work on a Phoenix-based task force, including yourselves, with members of the police department, to strategize how to unpack some of the things that have been recommended today?
I will be the first one to sign up.
All right, very good. Let the records show that we're gonna put this together and make it happen. Let's give our panel a round of applause. They've done an excellent job. Thank you so much. It's been very educational. I know all the people who are listening on Facebook Live not only got good information, but I also say you rendered your comments and recommendation in a way that I think inspires people. You not only informed people today, but you inspired people. And Dr. Stewart, that hope that you talked about is so important. We cannot afford in 2020 to lose hope. Because if we lose hope, then we won't vote. If we lose hope, then we won't count the census. If we lose hope, that we'll be attending the next funeral. You know, and so I do think this is a opportune moment, an opportune movement that we all need to be involved in. So on behalf of Arizona and all of the American Legion Post 65, thank you so much for participating.
Ladies and gentlemen, can we have another big round of applause for our moderator and all of our panelists? Now, as our panelists take their seats, our moderator, you guys can go ahead and take a seat out in the audience. Our moderator will take a quick break. We got him some water. And can we please have our second panelist for the second session join us up front and take your seats? Thank you, James. Thank you, James. Thank you, James. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Larry. As we have our other second panelists take their seats, I will introduce you to our second panelist, and then we will bring back our moderator. No, any order. Can we have Sheriff Pinzon, Maricopa County Attorney Alistair Adele, is the Maricopa County Attorney with us today? Okay, I don't see her. Mr. Reginald Bolden here with us today. And Chief Alan Rodbell is here with us today. Okay, if we can have your seats, we're going to start our second panel. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to restart our program. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to restart our program. Thank you. Thank you for taking your seats. All right. We do have refreshments in the back for those that need to slide back and get some refreshments. And then we will restart our program. The Maricopa County attorney will be here in 2 minutes. She had a prior engagement and she is on her way. So we will go ahead and proceed with the introduction of our second panelist. First, with a combined 30 years in law enforcement, 21 years at Phoenix PD, Maricopa County Sheriff Paul Pinzon. And Chief Special Agent of Attorney General Arizona, Mr. Reggie Grisby. Let's give him a round of applause. We also have Arizona State Representative Reginald Bolden. And next we have Police Chief of the City of Scottsdale, my friend, Chief Alan Rodbell. And representing Arizona State Representative District 27, Diego Rodriguez. And award-winning litigator, appointed October 2019, Maricopa County Attorney, Ms. Alistair Adele. Let's give her a round of applause. You're not late, you're right on time. If you all can grab your microphones, make sure that they're on. At this time, we'd like to bring back up our moderator. Let's give him a big round of applause, Dr. Ben Chavis, Jr.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you very much for agreeing to be on this panel. We had a first panel of community leaders, and as representative of law enforcement, you're also community leaders. We have some very important questions that have been designed for the panel. I'm going to start off with our sheriff. I'm from North Carolina. Down in North Carolina, we call your position, you're the high sheriff. What is the position of Arizona law enforcement agencies on issues like judicial reform, civilian advisory boards, mandatory body cameras, and timely release of the body cam video once it's involved in a situation? There's multiple questions, and you can take your time, Sheriff. What single law enforcement policy change should be made to affect a positive difference and impact on communities of color here in this county?
First, thank you for allowing me to participate in this panel, in this event that AP I know puts a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into, and I'm sure everybody's 6 feet away, so I hope you're okay with me taking off my mask. Yeah, there's a lot there to unravel, and my situation is somewhat unique. You know, having spent my career with the Phoenix Police Department, but now running an agency that is under federal court oversight. So a lot of the things that you speak of are actually already implemented, and it's due to the fact that this office, in particular, had a history of discrimination, and although it existed impacting the black community, it was specific to the Hispanic community. So when we talk about things that need to be implemented, such as body-worn cameras and ensuring that chokeholds are not a practice within this, I have to be direct and say we're talking a lot about a lot of symptomatic issues. You know, when we talk about a chokehold, what happened to Mr. Floyd was not a chokehold; it was a strangulation. It was hate and other actions that should never be aligned with law enforcement that were criminal in nature. So all these things we talk about, civil oversight and having advisory boards, they all exist in my organization with great pride. When I took the office, we immediately empowered an African American board, a Hispanic board, an LGBTQ board to help us with policy, help us with change, help us to develop a culture where we lead with respect. You know, I heard that spoken earlier. I think it was Mr. White who spoke about it. Respect isn't a gift we get. Respect is something that defines who we are and what we give. But when we talk about the issues of law enforcement, we can change symptoms, but we have to address the causal effect. And it is, as the pastor said, it is racism, it is discrimination. It is things that are embodied in people as humans, unfortunately, that either they choose to fight against or they choose to embrace. So as law enforcement leaders, the number one thing that I believe we have to commit to, and that is condemning acts that are in conflict with our values and with our oath of office. When we say the Pledge of Allegiance and we say, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, it doesn't say for one particular category of people. It says for all. And as much as I can take my oath of office or pledge to a flag, I would tell you, for me, my core value is for my faith. You know, and I'm not saying that in judgment of, you know, Glenn had mentioned earlier, he's of Jewish faith, I'm from Catholicism. You know, my guidelines come from my faith on how we treat others with respect and care and compassion. So all these elements are woven up, and I'm not sure I'm really getting to the crux of your question, but quite frankly, as people, if we can't care for our brothers and our sisters and recognize that law enforcement is a privilege to protect others and to protect the oath, and then we don't own it or caretakers of it, then we're not deserving to keep it. So all those things that are communal in nature must be woven into who we are as people and who we are as an institution so that we can better represent the values.
You mentioned the decree consent order. How much longer will the county sheriff's department be under that federal decree?
That's a great question. I was a young man when I took this office. Not feeling so young anymore. And I'm not sure that I will see the day when we're not under federal court oversight. But you know what's bothersome to me? And it's not in judgment of the federal court oversight, but when the monitors come to evaluate and try to help us make change in this office, there's not a single African American in representation of the federal court oversight. So although we have law enforcement professionals, we need to be woven into other cultures, other perspectives, other skill sets to truly make change, because it's not just about law enforcement, as I said, symptomatic issues. It is about cultural issues. So we could be under federal court oversight for another 5 or 10 years for the cost of, and let me just close with this. You know, it's cost the county $175 million thus far, since 2013. And many of you are aware of this, but in our, you know, we have the 4th largest county in the nation. I think it's the 2nd or 3rd largest jail system. We pay nearly $125 every day to incarcerate someone in Maricopa County. Yet I think the average cost to educate is $20. So if in 85040 we know that we have a challenge with disproportionate investment in our children, how can we truly justify that we're spending millions and millions of dollars to incarcerate instead of spending millions and millions of dollars to educate, to keep young men and women, primarily of color, out of a system that absolutely is disparate? So we talk about symptoms often, but let's get to the crux of it and talk about investment in our children, in our communities of color. And I'll close with this. And let me go really longer than I should have. But my wife's always my best counsel. And she was quoting Timothy to me saying, you know, there's scripture that says, if there's 100 sheep and one wanders from the flock, the shepherd is going to go care for that one, not to the negligence of the other 99. But when we talk about Black Lives Matter, it is the one sheep from the flock that needs the most attention. And no one should be threatened or fear that. We should embrace it and say, as a community, we need to care for all of our sheep. But when one wanders and is in danger, that's where we must focus our attention. So for me, and I appreciate it, again, I'll get off the question itself, but federal court oversight is a factor, but communal investment in law enforcement to make sure that we are better at what we do is more the cure than the symptom.
Well, thank you. We appreciate your answer. And the county is probably in better shape with you being sheriff, because most sheriffs don't really admit what you have stated today. So all hope is not lost here. Representative Boland, a legislative question. What kind of legislation has been passed in the last 3 years that helps bridge the law enforcement community and communities of color? And what further legislation you think needs to be
So thank you. That's a great question. And first, I just want to say thank you all for being here, because this is an important conversation. With regards to the legislation, I want to first begin opening up with just a quick short story. Imagine being a middle school teacher, going to Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, hopping on an airplane, landing in your hometown in Akron, Ohio, and your father's there to pick you up. You decide that you're going to get in the car and you're going to drive home because your father drove to the airport to pick you up. And as you're driving, lights, sirens behind you. You realize it's you, that they're stopping, so you exit off the highway, you make a right, and then you make a right into the gas station. And an officer opens his door, gun drawn, screaming, "Hands out of the window." So that's me. My hands is out the window. Then the next order is cut off the engine. So now you're in a tough situation. A gun's drawn on you. Your hands are being told to be placed out the window. Now you're being asked to reach into the car to cut off the engine. I cut off the engine. Throw the keys on the dash. Throw the keys on the dashboard. Hands back out the window. Myself and my dad. The officer comes around, gun still pointed, then decides to holster it, asked for driver's license, registration. Of course, we had it. And asked, why did you, whoa, no. He said, do you know why I stopped you? I don't. Your headlights weren't on. When you face a gun being drawn on you, literally less than an hour of going back to your hometown because your headlights isn't on, that lets you know that there's so much more that's happening in our society. And I literally, could have been another hashtag. And it's so many stories that you have that you start to bury these stories. There's so many things that happen. You start to, push it back, and, you don't know what, there's just so much. And, when I think about this fight, it's instances like that that really push me to say we have to do more. At the state legislature, there are a number of things that we can do. I think that with regards to bridging the gap between police and the community, I don't think we've done enough. Actually, 3 years ago, Philando Castile, young man, was shot and killed inside of his car. He had a gun on him, and he let the officer know, and he reached for the gun, and the officer shot him. And it was at that point that I was inspired to write a piece of legislation with regards to how can we ensure that police officers and also people who are driving, we have the same set of reality when we're stopped by police. Because if I ask 10 different people in here, what should you do when you're stopped by police, we'd get 10 different answers. Some people say, turn on the lights. Some people say, reach in the glove compartment, get your license or registration. Some people say, just keep your hand on the steering wheel. People have different things. And we ran a test. We asked 10 different people. We asked 10 different police officers. We got 20 different answers. So the idea was to write a piece of legislation that would allow for us to have a common set of rules so we know what to expect. Throughout the process, of course, anytime you're introducing police reform legislation at the state capitol, and this is not to be partisan, the reality is it is not welcome. And I have my own suspicions and reasons why, but we have not been able to get to police reform legislation. And throughout that meeting and those the reforms, I was able to connect with the governor's office, and we were able to actually work on an agreement to get the Department of Transportation and MBD to actually change the driver's manual. So the recommendations that we have for what to do when you're stopped by police officers is now in the driver's manual, and anyone who's getting their driver's license, they actually have to pass that section. So that was something that we were able to get in place. It's not a law, so it could be changed by any administration, but that was some progress. But there's still more. We asked for a special session to address at least 5 different things. The first was body cameras on all, and that is something that's not controversial. It shouldn't be controversial. You ask law enforcement officers, they say absolutely we should have body cameras. You ask the public, they say absolutely. And I often say this, there's very few workplaces in America that you could go to without seeing a camera. Very few workplaces in America. So cameras in the workplace is nothing new. So why not have that within our law enforcement officers? And in fact, the largest, our state, the Arizona Department of Public Safety is the largest police agency that actually does not require body cameras. And does not have them on their law enforcement officers. Only those who purchase their own are the ones who have those. So that's a change that we need to make immediately. The second was, we believe that there should be external investigations and officer-involved shootings. And it's not because we don't believe that there could be fair, transparent investigations. I just find it very difficult, and I think it can be very difficult if you work with someone every single day to then investigate them. And for us, we saw that over 2011 through 2018 that there were 600 officer-involved shootings, and there were only 1 officer that was ever charged, and he was later acquitted. So we believe that there must be some type of independent investigations. We truly believe that we have to challenge de-escalation training and racial bias training. We have to ensure that there's a peace officer database so we don't find ourselves in a position right now where many people don't know the policy of a Phoenix Police Department is that you have every 3 years or 5 years, disciplinary records are purged from law enforcement officers. The disciplinary record is purged. So out of 3,000 sworn officers, you have 525 officers whose disciplinary records are purged, and that's written into policy. That's an issue. Why would you need to purge disciplinary records? That's immediate action that we can take. And then the last piece is something with regards to the term of qualified immunity. I truly believe it's at a federal level. We also have it at state level. I believe that when you have officers who act unlawfully, as taxpayers, why should we have to pay multi-million-dollar settlements while the officer faces no liability? I believe in civil suits, officers should have to face civil liability in the event that they're acting unlawful. If the worst consequence that can happen to you is you're fired when you kill someone, I think that's an issue. And these are up for debate. Some people may agree, some people may disagree, but let's have a debate, let's have a conversation. Hopefully we can get there.
Thank you. In the new bill that was just introduced into Congress, the Justice and Policing Act, it requires a national database of all officers at county, municipal, federal, all law enforcement, database on disciplinary actions. And it would preclude, it would make it unlawful to purge disciplinary procedures. So, we don't know what's going to happen, but it's been introduced into Congress. I want to turn now to our distinguished lawyer here, Mr. Dare. It has been said that when you go into most police departments, most law enforcement officers already know who the problem officers are. What needs to be done to get law enforcement to police itself and get rid of bad apples so that all officers aren't painted with the same brush because of a few bad officers?
I appreciate the question. First of all, thank you to AP and my distinguished colleagues on this panel. I see a lot of familiar faces in the room. It's good to see all of you, even though I can't identify everybody with their masks, but that's our new normal. So I thank you for the question. I think in any profession, whether it's law enforcement, lawyers, doctors, we have bad apples, and they make the rest of us look bad. And the ones that are doing the right thing, we want them disciplined too. So I can tell you that our office, we have an entire committee that reviews officer integrity issues. It's commonly known as the Brady List. And we look at the conduct and the integrity and the honesty of the officers. I can tell you that the other 14 county attorneys, so the 15 county attorneys in the state, we are looking at how we can be more collaborative and looking at other cross-jurisdictional issues. Because you're right, they make the rest of us look bad in any profession. So we're working collaboratively with law enforcement. At the same time, we want to make sure that the law enforcement officers that are doing the right things, that are of integrity, that we are protecting them. And I can assure you from the county attorney's office, we are the third largest prosecution agency in the country, behind Chicago and LA. And if it's an officer or a civilian, whomever commits a crime, they will be held accountable.
All right, thank you. Accountability is very important. Let's go to Brother Rodriguez. Some believe law enforcement unions and advocacy groups have been highlighted as being part of the problem by protecting officers that should no longer be patrolling our communities. What are your thoughts about how we can get more accountability with police or with law enforcement, broadly speaking, and the issue of the unions sometimes, because they're the union, they also have to protect the bad officers along with the good officers?
Thank you. I'm very excited to address this question. I'd also like to take a quick moment to thank the foundation for sponsoring this event and thank the other participants as well for coming, and Mr. Powell. I'm proud to say that I represent the district that we are sitting in right now alongside Mr. Bolding, Representative Bolding, and Senator Rebecca Rios. We talk about these issues quite often. 840, 8401, 84042, they're entirely within this district. And for me, this issue is personal because I've been an attorney since 1995. I started off as a prosecutor in the Pima County Attorney's Office. I've prosecuted everything from dog bite cases all the way up to first-degree homicides. I then opened my own practice, and I've been a criminal defense attorney for the past 12 years, pretty much. So the majority of my career has been spent dealing with these issues within the criminal justice system, dealing with these issues within the law enforcement system. So to your question, the three things we need to do, number one, and I've heard it here today, and it's wonderful to hear it, we need to acknowledge that systemic racism exists in law enforcement and the criminal justice system. It needs to be sought out, it needs to be rooted out, and it needs to be eliminated, bottom line. The second thing that we need to be aware of is that when it comes to issues with law enforcement, transparency and accountability are not always part of the culture. You know, we use the phrase bad apples, but they're silent apples. Apples don't talk. Good apples, bad apples, apples don't talk. We need to give those apples voices. We need to make sure that law enforcement understands that transparency and accountability need to be part of the culture. Because if you want to rebuild that trust, then the community needs to understand and trust in the fact that if something goes wrong, that another officer who sees it is going to step in, speak up, report it, and follow through on that. That's just basic. And the second thing is we need to look at the culture that's being taught, because violence is taught as a tool to address non-compliance to law enforcement officers. And I understand that there is de-escalation training, and that is very important to teach officers how to de-escalate. But if you heard the comments from the head of the union here with the Phoenix Police Department, where essentially he said, okay, well, if you take away the chokehold, well, then guess what? Something worse might happen. That's not acceptable. And that needs to come down from the top, that's not acceptable. It needs to come down from the prosecutorial wing as well, that's not acceptable, because it's something that needs to be brought to the attention of every single person involved in this process, from the community leaders to the judicial officers, the judges, the clerks, the probation officers. We need to teach people what systemic racism means, and especially the prosecutors, because I've been on ride-alongs as a prosecutor. I know what happens, and I've heard the conversations. So if you want to have a real substantive discussion about this, then we do need to take this head on. There needs to be real leadership on this, real education, and a frank admission that the systemic racism that's present in our law enforcement and judicial systems needs to be addressed and eliminated.
Very good. You know, it's interesting convergence between the two panels. The issue of accountability, the issue of transparency, but also the issue of acknowledgement. You know, it's hard to solve a problem if you're not willing to even acknowledge that the problem exists. So I think one of the things that's coming out of today's forum is the prerequisite of acknowledging that systemic racism is a live, living, not just historical problem, but contemporary and present-day problem that not only needs to be acknowledged, but correspondingly addressed. Brother Grisby, what do you, from your perspective, from the office that you hold, how do you see this whole issue of how do we get the proper engagement between law enforcement and the community that leads to resolution of the issues that we're discussing today?
Well, thank you, Dr. Chavis. And before I begin, I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, and I grew up there during the socially turbulent 60s. So a lot of this stuff is not new to me. It's a shame that it's come this far. But the first thing I have to do, being from the South, anyone knows this, I have to acknowledge the members of the clergy who are present here. They've played a big role in what has happened in our communities and in law enforcement, so I do that now and recognize both of you and any other members of the clergy that may be here. There's two things. I represent the Attorney General, Mr. Mark Brnovich. He hired me. I left San Diego and Oceanside. I had over 30 years experience there, working at the second in command at Oceanside Police Department. I think that one of the things that happens, the Attorney General has for about the last 3 or 4 years, he has tried to get legislation passed either through executive order or through actual legislation that will give our agency the ability to have oversight into officer-involved shootings as well as instances of excessive force. What that looks like, that's something subject for debate, but we've tried to look at that for a long time. But to get back to your question, Dr. Chavis, I think that one of the problems that happens with law enforcement agencies is that a lot of us, and I say us, we have not legitimized our authority to use force. Use of force is a critical component of the job, but unfortunately, officers are taught about law and order and officer safety. And what I mean by legitimizing your authority to use force, you always see the public information officer standing out saying the officer or the deputy contacted someone, they had a weapon, or they charged them, or they rushed them, and they used their firearm to defend themselves or someone else, and then they become upset and can't understand why it is that the community is upset. Well, the community is upset because that police department never reached out to the community and established any trust. They never showed any empathy. They never showed any compassion. What they did was, as you see often so many times, is they adopt sometimes the attitudes of our elected officials, and sometimes partisanship creeps into how the streets are policed. I think that the old idea of bringing the police department into the community, going out, I think that's run its course. I think now we have to bring the community into the police department. They have to be able to see our policies and what it is we do. They have to be able to see what it is that how things happen, how we develop policies, how we train people. And I think that if we are able to do that, then we'll start opening some doors. We talk about de-escalation training. The big issue is this: can an officer, an effective officer, balance the risk of making a forced decision versus maybe the risk of delay? You see what I'm saying? If you have to use force, in the instance, look at it in Atlanta, what was the risk between letting that gentleman flee versus the risk of using force at that time? I mean, how do you balance those two? That's the issue. And going back to Ms. Fidel, our agency has worked with them very closely on some issues with regards to police misconduct, with regards to the Brady file, with regards to some other investigations. So I think we're making progress in that regard, but it's not enough. And I want to go back to something, and I'm talking like a pastor here, so I'll shut up in a moment here. But it's kind of long-winded. But I work for a man, I'm an African-American that works for a man who has an R after his name. When I sat down for my interview with him, the first question that he asked me was, first of all, could I tell him what the numbers were, disparity between unarmed black men being shot versus white people being shot. He asked me how I felt about Black Lives Matter. He asked me how could our agency interact better with the community. We talked about training. We have been training in de-escalation, issues of cultural diversity, mental health for a long time. I know a little something about mental health and the role that it plays in our country and law enforcement. I'm the officer who had to shoot my son, who tried to kill my wife, because he has mental illness. And that's something that sticks with me for a long time. So when I see people with mental health issues and I see them trying to make that a law enforcement issue, it really is, but unfortunately, law enforcement doesn't have the tools and the training to deal with that.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments, and thank you for your candor. I think that the discussion thus far has been very, very helpful. I want to give our panelists here, how do you see, let me put it this way, what's distinctive about Phoenix, Arizona, this community, when it comes to law enforcement working with the community?
Anyway, again, thank you to everybody for participating. EP, thanks for setting it up. Doctor, thank you for moderating this. So what's distinctive about Phoenix? Before I start, if you don't mind, I just want to explain a little bit, maybe some of my additional responsibilities besides just Scottsdale, which might be pertinent to this conversation. First of all, I think at this point I'm the second vice president for the Arizona Association of Chiefs of Police. The president could not be here today. He's actually out of town. The first vice president, staying in the back, Sylvia Moria, who is from Tempe, Arizona. She's the, I guess, beginning of the year, becomes the president of ACOP. And I think I can speak for Sylvia. She'll stop me if I can't. We are committed to working with the community here in Arizona. ACOP represents the entire state chiefs of police. And so we are very interested in this issue, have been for years, and have been working on this for years, and we continue committed to making it a great place to live. Second thing, I have responsibility. I'm on the Arizona Post Board. It's a governor's appointment. It's the Post Board is the Arizona Peace Officers Standards and Training. And so we're required to identify credentialing for police officers, the education they need, the background they need, their training to prepare to be police officers, their certification, their in-service training, and identify any real hot topics that might be pertinent to in-service training ongoing to improve our profession. We also look at certification to determine whether an officer has crossed that line, and we can take away an officer's certification. So they cannot be law enforcement officers in the state of Arizona. That national database that people talk about, we participate in sharing that information, but there is no actual national database. So I'm very much committed into making sure that the very best people become police officers in the state of Arizona and maintain their certification. And we remove people that have no business in this business. We need the power and authority to be able to do that. Sometimes there's obviously pushback, but we make it up. We're very serious about that responsibility. Accountability is most important to all of us. And I think that's the term I would use most when I talk about Arizona law enforcement. I've spent first 26 years of my career in the Washington, D.C. area in Montgomery County, Maryland, which you're probably very familiar with, sir, where I was born and raised in 2002, just after 9/11, and I've been the police chief for about 17 years now. And one thing I noticed in law enforcement in Arizona that is much better than any place I've ever been in the country is that we're state certified and we have state authority. And so we work extremely well together. I had tremendous help from both the Sylvia and the sheriff's jurisdiction. The most recent event we had at our mall, we work incredibly well together. We know each other's policies. We know each other's rules. We understand use of force, and we work very well together. So when you talk about how much I love Arizona law enforcement, I will tell you this is a great place to be in law enforcement. We have great committed professionals, and it's sad when unfortunately one officer somewhere in another state does something that impacts on us, but it gives us the opportunity to take a look at ourselves and see what can we do to improve, where do we need to pick it up, how do we best partner with our communities. And we have tremendous oversight of both the Attorney General's office and the County Attorney's office here in Maricopa. So when you talk about the need for oversight, we may do the investigation, but somebody is clearly reviewing that investigation to make sure it's done correctly. And if it isn't, they ask the right questions. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
Yes, it does. Just a follow-up. When an officer transfers or attempts to transfer from one jurisdiction or even out of state to your jurisdiction, is there, in your mind, sufficient background check to make sure what the officer's record was, say from Washington or from Maryland or from Virginia, comes to Arizona? Are you satisfied with that there are safeguards in place to make sure that that's a good officer and not a bad officer?
I'll go ahead and start real quickly. The answer to that question is yes. So background investigators will go to the prior jurisdiction, get releases to see records, talk to other supervisors. When I transferred here, I came from the police department. They literally came out to Montgomery County and spent a couple of days talking to people around the building and looking at my background. There's an adequate investigation, a very thorough investigation occurs, and then there's a polygraph that has to be passed that everything you told was truthful. Some jurisdictions don't destroy records after 3 years if they're sustained case. In Maryland, if there's a sustained case, it's on your record for. If it's a not sustained case or it's exonerated, meaning it happened but was within policy, those records are in fact expunged. So there's also different states have different rules regarding their record keeping.
Great, thank you. We're ready to go into next steps, and we're going to start with Adair. Attorney, we're going to start with you. After hearing the morning panel and hearing your colleagues from law enforcement, what would be the single most important next step here in Phoenix and in this county to improve relations between the police and the community, and vice versa?
Well, thank you for the question. I do want to extend on our Scottsdale PD's chief's comment. Okay. With prosecutors, it used to be that we only had information on officers that were on the Brady list for our own jurisdictions, and now we're being more collaborative. So if somebody transfers from, Yavapai County to Sheriff Penzone's office and they were on the Brady list, well, they might know that, we might not. And so the prosecutors are now being collaborative in that respect. I can tell you as far as next steps, at least from the county attorney's office, we're committed to having these conversations. I see a lot of familiar faces that some of I even saw earlier this week, just to listen and learn what these issues are. It was previously in Maricopa County that we did not have advisory boards at the county attorney's office. I think those are absolutely critical. And while we might not always agree on issues, we at least need to listen to each other. And that is a huge step. And hopefully it drives policy that makes change. I believe...
How do you get on the advisory board?
Great question. So Zach, from my office back there, Zach Shira, is heading up our advisory boards. And with the pandemic, things have been slowed a little bit. We're going to have an application process, but we're having 2 advisory boards. One of business leaders that I know that we reached out to Glenn and others to talk about how we can look at reducing recidivism and getting employees back to work and being successful with criminal justice reform, but also a community advisory board made of nonprofits, community leaders, faith-based groups, to give input on how we can make our criminal justice system better. And so we're developing an application process for that. And it should be forthcoming in the next couple of months, hopefully by 30 days from now. Okay. I can tell you that next steps, at least from my perspective, is it's incumbent upon prosecutors statewide, nationwide, to realize that prosecutors wield great power. And we have to do the right things for the right reasons every single time. So in our office, what we're doing is we are having a more robust diversion program. We eliminated a fee of $630 for people just to participate in diversion. And that population that needs that, they can't pay for that. So we're getting them the treatment that they need. We're treating the offender and not just the offense. We're looking at mental health issues, drug addiction, and so all of these things are just small incremental steps, but it's conversations like these, bringing people together like this, that are the first steps in the process, and I'm committed to doing that.
Very good, thank you. Chief, next steps from your perspective. And I think, first of all, I want to thank you because the chief of police of any jurisdiction is, determines to some extent what the rank and file does. One of the questions I didn't ask you, I just want you to elaborate when you talk about next steps. How often or how frequent do you have these discussions with your rank and file, the men under your authority in the chain of command, about the importance of gaining that trust of the community, having that accountability, so that the community looks up to the police rather than fearing the police?
Well, I guess I'll answer that question first. As recently as last week, I wrote a email out to my troops, and it'll be part of our police line newsletter that we put out, because we had a demonstration 2 weeks ago now on Sunday, and it was actually really nice. We had 2,000 young folks and quite frankly some people my age as well that walked down the streets of Main Street of Scottsdale. It was extremely peaceful. In fact, the complaint I received from one gentleman was, you don't have enough trash cans in this city, because they picked up their trash. There was no debris, and along with the chants and the prayers, there was an opportunity to kneel, and an opportunity to kneel for close to 9 minutes in memory. And I took a knee, and I took a knee next to a young to a family that all had Black Lives Matter T-shirts, and a young girl that's younger than my granddaughter, probably about 7. I kneeled with them quietly, and I was in uniform. First, I asked permission if I could join them, and they said yes. And we sat there for a while quietly. And when it was over, I got up and I said to her, I said, you're going to remember this the rest of your life. This is really important. And as I walked away, the family said thank you. They didn't know I was a police chief. I didn't introduce myself as police chief. I was blue. And so I got some criticism from some people in the department that came to the ways of, you took a knee. And I literally wrote an essay explaining my history, my personal history, coming up in a Jewish family and respecting everyone, regardless of what their station in life was. My parents drove that home. Everybody's important. And so I wrote that essay to my organization as a reason to let them know that, hey, I took a knee, and the why was, this is about justice, it was about unity, it was about being together, it was about respecting each other. And who in this room and who in this world can't actually agree with that?
What was the response from the officers?
I got some great response. I got some marvelous response from personnel. I didn't get anybody to say anything negative. They probably kept that to themselves. But my point to you is I take every opportunity I can to discuss that. We embarked on teaching implicit bias training. Unfortunately, the COVID experience has been horrible for that kind of training. You have to sit in a room with people to have that conversation. You've got to read the nonverbal. You've got to have that discussion. You've got to discuss feelings. And so we sort of postponed it until we can get back into a room again, but we still have to talk about it when we get together.
Is that a public letter? Your email to the officers?
I didn't make it public.
Okay. Because one of the issues, Chief, is that the good things that you do, hardly nobody knows about it.
I've been counseled that way before.
If you do something bad, everybody knows about it. And the issue, I would say the opportunities for police executives to take is the proactive, what you did, is to put out, not only to your officers, but to the community at large, the fact that you are a chief of police that cares about your community to the extent to which you would join the community in a solemn act. I think that's, look, I travel around the country a lot, and I'm telling you, police chiefs don't get that kind of coverage. They're mainly apologetic for wrongdoing rather than proactive to try to prevent wrongdoing from being done. So, you know, I'm just telling you, you should think about handing me over that so I can put it in some of our newspapers to say, guess what? I met a police chief that took a knee.
Thank you. To answer your question, however, I do have an advisory board. We have 4 district police stations. Each district station has a commander that has an advisory board that represents his or her district. And I take representation from each of those 4 districts, and then I have a bigger board, 3 of which members are actually in this room at this time. George, AP, and Prentice, if Prentice is still here, they are on my board. And we have the board that includes, it's very inclusive. We have business owners, we have hoteliers, we have bar owners, we have major event promoters. We have representatives of the Hispanic community, the Sikh community, we have the Jewish Community Center there. It's very much a very diverse community. And we talk about laws of arrest, and we talk about use of force, and we talk about police tactics, so that there's an understanding of how we perform our jobs, and we can answer those questions. Both presidents of the NAACP, East Valley and Maricopa, are members. And so it really gets to the heart of the issues where we actually have conversations about tactics. And if I could just make one more comment, which I'll pass it on, is my major concern, and we've heard a little today, is that when we talk about law enforcement, we talk in absolutes, that you absolutely can't do this, or you absolutely have to do that. And part of law enforcement is really about circumstances and place and facts. And so when you take away the ability to make those decisions in law enforcement by having absolutes, it does have a tendency to make it very difficult for our job. And to the issue of, and I get the issue of you should never choke, not a question, but the issue of taking away the ability of officers to control a situation by absolutes, I think will cause a problem for us in the long run. And so that's a concern I have, that we're not talking absolutes. We understand why we do the things we do, when we do them, and hold us accountable to them correctly and for the right reasons. That's important.
Thank you, Chief. Sheriff, next steps. I mean, given your background, first for being a officer, police department of Phoenix, now the sheriff of the county, you probably have your ear close to the ground about what is going on county-wide. What do you see as the next steps in this joint discussion between the police and the community toward the end of improving relations ongoingly?
Thank you. You know, there's a song, "Change is Going to Come," and the youngsters think Seal sings it, but it's actually Sam Cooke. And I got news for you.
It's a great song.
It is. But change doesn't come. You have to usher in change. You have to be the change. So if we truly want to see a different world for our children, we have to commit to work and not just talk. So when we talk about next steps, and I have an appreciation for, you know, with the gentlemen here who are empowered to pass legislation and help us in different ways for their position. So with respect to the beliefs on things that can be initiated, I would tell you one of my frustrations, and I don't know if my colleagues would agree, is oftentimes we see legislation initiated by those who haven't necessarily conferred with those who have to do the job, or best practices on how to make this change. The other thing that I want to really be cautious about, and I'll preface it with this, I want to thank Reggie for sharing his personal story, because you know, you could hear the gasp in the room for someone to be in the position that he was in and have to take that type of an action. So I've known him for a long time, and he is an incredible man of character and integrity. But to share that today was, I mean, just the greatest act of kindness and humility. So could you just give him a little bit of appreciation for his courage to do that? So here's what gets lost in this, and by no means am I trying to level the playing field, because it is unlevel. But we're talking about people and people's lives. When we talk about the issue of racism, racism isn't an incubator that occurs in law enforcement. Okay, racism is a reflection of our society as a whole, and law enforcement is the place where, because of the inherent privilege of power that we get, that it can be abused. So we really have to ask ourselves, do we want to be a nation where law enforcement is so demonized that we cannot recruit good men and women to take on such an important task? Because this nation was founded in rules that are intended to protect everyone. Therefore, we must have men and women who are willing to take on that task. So we really have to be cautious, and as my colleague said here, Chief Rodwell, we cannot demonize the profession because of the failure of the people. We have to find a way to be better. So as we talk about oversight and we talk about accountability, they have to be woven into everything that we do with transparency. And you had asked me when this began, I apologize because I didn't answer. You said, how frequent do we, or how quickly do we release body-worn video camera? My office's practice has been to be extremely aggressive with it, with the parameters that as long as no element of it either influences a potential jury pool or undermines the ability to investigate. But if by pattern of practice we're more quickly and readily releasing that, people have the chance to see facts versus fiction. But here's what I want to offer as potential next changes in addition to all the oversight and accountability. If we don't invest in men and women in law enforcement to help them remain healthy, we will continue to repeat this cycle. And here's what I mean by that. The majority of the men and women who come into law enforcement at the age of 21, 22, 23-ish come with some level of purity, almost, you know, like a parent to a child. They don't have bad behaviors until we impose them on them. So when we train them in the academy and we teach them certain attributes or skills, characteristics, whatever it may be, at that stage, they head out the door with good intentions. And it's not till other influences, personal experiences, tragedies, and it may be law enforcement related, it could be in their own home, but they are going to experience things that potentially could change them and cause them to act in a way that previously maybe wasn't the case because they are learning on the go. If we do not commit as a law enforcement profession, have a wellness division in every agency across the nation, where not just at inception, but at 3 years, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, we bring our employees back, we check on their mental health, we check on their physical health, we check on all these other factors that could impact them, and we find ways to help them stay well, how can we expect them to care for a community? Imagine going on a call where you've left your home and maybe you have a domestic issue, a child in need, a financial strain, you go to work, and now you go to a call where a young infant has been brutally beaten, or you go to a traffic accident with a drunk driver where there's been a tragedy, that affects people. And these are not excuses, so I want to be very clear about this. But if we want to see a law enforcement profession that we can be proud of, then we have to invest in these men and women throughout their career to help them stay well so they can care for others. And you know what that does for those of us in charge? That helps us separate the field of those deserving of the privilege and those that we need to remove from the process. Because when I have something like that, that helps me better identify those who can continue to be successful and contribute versus those who have bias or hate in their heart and no longer entitled to have this kind of authority, then how can we be successful in managing an organization over time, ensuring that the privilege is protected? So this has to be a balance, and it can't be a demonization one way or the other. It has to be about coming together and having law enforcement be a reflection of the greater values of the community and not this division from the community that suddenly we can no longer trust, we can no longer have confidence in. And I'll close with this, and this is, again, to Reggie's credit. The biggest change in my office was not trying to change the culture from the inside out, but from the outside in, meaning inviting men and women from the community to participate in community academies, programs for young adults where they interact with our employees, actually having members of the community whose first language is Spanish go through an academy and learn about the entire organization. And here's where the change occurs. Not just for them, but when our employees see these individuals invested and interested in the employees themselves, they garner this mutual respect, and they have a different perspective because it's human eyes viewing human eyes. So if we want to see the and here's what it's led to. We just had a cadet class the other day, and if I told you about a cadet class 2 years ago, I would stand in the room and probably see 15 to 20 young men and women who are white. The class that I had last week, I think it was 90% minorities, and their families there are so proud to see that they are invested in participating in the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. So this is a complex, comprehensive issue, and we have to invest in all elements.
Thank you, Sheriff. And you have described a complex challenge, situation. I think the mistake is made in prior, not today. People come up with a quick fix, a simplistic fix to a complex problem. I think what has come out of today's forum are the complexities of the problem. And therefore, our solutions have to also be complex to adequately address the complexities of the problem. Part of my day job, I spend a lot of time with minority law enforcement officers around the country. And there's a group called the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, LEAP. They're in Maryland. A sergeant major, his name is Neil Franklin, 34-year history in law enforcement. And what he told me last week was something similar to what you just said. But he also said that wellness, particularly in law enforcement, also means continuing education. You'd be surprised, or you probably wouldn't be surprised, because this is Arizona. Until the latest controversy about Juneteenth, a lot of people didn't know what Juneteenth was. Although we know what it is in the black community, people outside the black community did not know what it was. The whole thing, it's hard, in my view, to have an officer to police a community where they don't understand the culture of the community. The language, the cultural values, and it's just not, I'm not just talking about the dress or the hairstyle, but as Representative Boland shared, we have to, accountability and transparency is a two-way street. It's not right in any jurisdiction for people of color to be literally in fear if they see the blue lights pulling them over. They see the blue lights pulling them over, or red lights pulling them over, and say, oh, this officer's pulling me over to help me. Maybe notice something's wrong with my vehicle. But unfortunately, right now, there's a lot of fear. People get pulled over. I don't know if I'm going to live through this. By the same token, there are a lot of officers who are afraid of who they're pulling over. They pull their weapons because they feel that because of racial profiling, that the person driving this nice car has probably got a gun. you know, because he's probably did something illegal to have this nice car, and therefore he's probably packing. That's the assumption. So obviously, the officer wants to protect their life. But I guarantee you, if there was more, in addition to the wellness training that you've said, cultural training, insights about these various communities, I think it would equip your officers better to do what they have to do. But also, I think if you look at a lot of the things that have happened over the last few months in our nation, a lot of it is not on a rush to judgment of the value of somebody's life or not the value of life. But I think sometimes there are a lot of pent-up stuff that goes on in law enforcement officers. You said it, they're dealing with tension. I'm almost certain that if that officer in Atlanta, I'm going to talk about, I'll just use Atlanta, who, what most people don't know, before the shooting took place, there was almost a 35, 40-minute discussion between the two officers and Raylard Brooks. He admitted he had been drinking. See, I live 2 blocks away. I park my car, I can walk home. You know, and people say, well, he grabbed the officer's taser. He grabbed the officer's taser because by that time he thought his life was in danger. He's trying to get away. The officer had to make a decision to apprehend him, stop him, or call for help, or to take his life. Obviously, the officer made the decision to shoot. That didn't happen here. But I guarantee you, that officer is sitting in jail now. If he had had a better wellness training, or what you call, but also understanding what happens in the communities that they police. So I agree with you, what you're saying, and I think we do need people in the community to go into the police department, and we do need people in the police department to go into the community. But I would say this, it shouldn't take a tragedy to make us do that.
Yeah.
We've had enough tragedies.
I'd like to offer, and again, I appreciate the patience. So,
no, it's okay. That's why we're here to try to get some
the life-changing moment for me. And you had mentioned to Chief Rodbell about releasing his statement, and oftentimes the reason we're cautious in doing that, because it's similar for me, is we don't want to be perceived as being opportunistic. And oftentimes we can be criticized like you're just doing this because it looks good as opposed to being the right thing to do. So if you have humility, you oftentimes err on the side of, you know, I don't need to stand on the top of the mountain to talk about me. I want to be at the bottom of the mountain and help people usher up. Right. But this was a defining moment in my life that I never expected.
Okay.
My wife now, who I've been with for 16 years, when I met her and I met my stepson for the first time, he's biracial. And I thought that I had an understanding of discrimination and race issues and other factors. But to understand how naive I was now in hindsight, yet I still only have the tip of the iceberg, because now as a man, and he was 17 when I met him, you know, he's 34 now, I have seen through his experiences a completely different world that I never expected. And it helped me to recognize I know nothing. In law enforcement, we have made a critical error, and it is this. We train today the way we did 30 years ago, with a few pieces of patchwork on it. Mental health, you know, implicit bias, we'll stick a band in and go, here's 4 hours, here's 10 hours. What we truly need to do is have the courage to take a look and say, over the last 10 years, how has law enforcement changed? What are our demands? What are our responsibilities? And if we erase all of the training and start from scratch, and we say, if we want to build the perfect guardian for our community to serve and protect, what does that training look like today versus then? And then how do we build an organization of people who are best equipped, that come from all walks of life, to deliver that service? We'll always have to run and chase and, unfortunately, occasionally use force or drive a car or investigate crime. But there's so many other elements to law enforcement now that did not exist 30 years ago that we need to rediscover who we are and revolutionize what it means to be a peace officer.
I just want to tell you that you're right to have humility because you have great power. But also, if you do something that's authentic, the community knows whether or not this is like a fake gesture. They will be able to discern whether or not you're sincere and whether or not you're doing it for the right reason. the letter you wrote, that was for the right reason. And the things that you're doing, that cadet class that you just talked about, that's a news article. Somebody should be, the community should know about that because it deals with aspirations. We have to, Dr. Stewart talked about hope. Hope and fear cannot coexist. And in the black community, there is literally profound 24/7, 360 degrees of fear. Partly informed by what they see in these videos through social media. And it's a big challenge. It is a big challenge. But I think the things that we're discussing today, I think can help take the right steps in the right direction.
Maybe John Legend will do the next version, a change has come, instead of change is going to come.
Well, you know, again, culture is also the music and the art and the spiritual. That's also a part of, a subset of culture is spiritual. So understanding those dynamics in all of the different communities, I think will be bode us well. Representative Boland, next steps.
So I think next steps are multifaceted. I think the first next step is that we have to have courage. And when I say we, I'm speaking in terms of elected leaders. And that there has been a mindset that the public wants you to be sort of this, you know, law and order type elected official. And if you can show that, you know, I'm protecting the community. I'm gonna, you know, if someone does something bad, we're gonna make sure that we have the harshest penalty to put them away. And that has been sort of the mindset for a number of years, just serving in office. And many times, elected leaders are often afraid to speak when they see injustices that are happening regarding law enforcement. And I use the word afraid because I can't think of anything else, any other reason. And that afraid could be afraid because they may not be reelected, afraid because they may be seen as weak, afraid for a number of reasons. But until elected officials have courage, and I recognize that, you know, and it's not, and I often, and I said this to a room of my colleagues who, and it's both Republican and Democrats, both sides. And I was speaking to a room of Democrats, and I said, you know, it is not comfortable for me to stand out here and say we need police reform. It's not the best thing to do, but you have to have courage to do it. While there were other members like, I don't know if we should say it that way. Let's just keep having meetings. Let's not. It's not the most comfortable thing, right? Because as an elected official, you're sort of taught, you know, fire, police, you know, faith community, business community. You know, that's sort of the pedigree of the politician that, you know, that does well. And you have elected leaders following that pedigree. And here we have all of that, right? We have, you know, business leaders, faith leaders. I think until you say, I'm not looking for this law and order mentality, I'm looking for someone that's going to actually create solutions to solve the problems that are happening in our community, and you are holding elected officials accountable to that, that's how you have elected officials to have the courage. Quite frankly, when you talk about criminal justice reform, and criminal justice is a lot, right? From policing to our courts to corrections to sentence, there's a lot. And quite frankly, when you have individuals, and I'm going to use an example on the conservative side, individuals who are part of the Koch brother network who say criminal justice reform is something that we should be talking about. You had elected officials say, okay, it's safe. It's a safe topic. And that's not to, you know, push on either side, but it's when you have business leaders and influencers to say it's okay to talk about reform that you give and you empower many elected leaders. And one of the things that's just striking for me is that when you look at the data, on average, every 5 days, an officer fires his gun and shoots someone in Arizona. And that's an issue. And quite frankly, it could, when you talk about what's justified, what's not justified, let's step back and let's look at the actual statute. And right now we have ARS 13410, which is use of deadly force. And that's what the statute, and simply, like the very first sentence says, the use of deadly force by a peace officer against another is justified when a peace officer reasonably believes that there is a necessary threat to themselves or a third person. When you talk about what does reasonably believe, that is very broad language. It's very broad. And we need to, and in my opinion, we need to shift that language. We need to start talking about imminent threat and using that as sort of the line of justification. If you are using your gun, that means that you feel that there is an imminent threat. And language matters. And at the legislature, we have the shalls and mays, and it's all about language. And I think until we really talk about true language at the state capitol, whether we have a legislature that's led by Democrats or a legislature that's led by Republicans, the idea of police reform will be just as difficult to pass if we don't have leaders like those in this room say that I am asking for you to help us move past this moment and really truly make it a movement. So I believe that elected officials have a great deal of power with the casting of their vote, but I also think as a community, there's a great deal of influence to give those who may not have the courage today, the courage tomorrow to actually talk about police reform. And with regards to the comments that there are elected leaders who speak and try to change reforms when there may not be law enforcement and they may have not done the job, I think it's true. I think it's the same thing in education, same thing in business, same thing in healthcare. You have lawmakers who may try to change the system when they may not have direct experience. And many times, what you find is that you have those individuals in those other industries, they tend to step out many times and talk about things that may not be done correctly or reforms. But in law enforcement, it is very difficult. Outside of this George Floyd incident, when you see an officer that does something that doesn't look right, that doesn't feel right, that's unlawful, to hear the good apples say that. It's very, it's far and few between that you hear that. And that takes courage too. And I think that there has to be, the more that we are able to have courage wherever we're at and truly move forward and say we're going to solve and make solutions, I think that's how we get there.
Thank you very much. We have about 4 minutes left, so I'm going to divide it up between Brother Grisby and Brother Rodriguez. Next steps.
Okay. I just want to say one thing, dovetailing on what Mr. Bolden said, and you've said this before, Dr. Chavis. The way that a government feels about its people is manifested how its police department treats its people. I'm a firm believer in that, because there are elected officials that that are the ones who hold police chiefs and other law enforcement officials to account. Two things I want to say. One, for us, the next steps, we've already embarked upon that quite some time ago. I did a course, several of us taught a course on officer-involved shootings and how the investigations, what they entail. We are in the course of working with Noble on the Know Your Rights law that talks to young people, but we're going to modify that to make it more applicable to the community at large. This speaks specifically to the foundations of our system, of constitutional system, your rights when contacted by the police, the circumstances in which police could contact you, and your responsibilities when contacted by the police. But I wanted to go back to something real briefly that my colleague, Chief Rod Bell, said here. The county attorney is responsible for conducting investigations of officer-involved shootings for determination as to whether or not they're lawful. And they don't deal with the issues of force options or training. They deal specifically with what was the officer's mindset when he engaged in that shooting. The police department will do its own investigation administratively to determine whether or not the policies were followed, in some instances even the law. But other than that, there's no oversight that comes in from another agency that looks and says, there's a culture that contributed to this, or there are some things in your policy, or there are some things that need to be changed or looked at, or there's some reforms that need to take place. Now, a lot of police departments do their own training reviews of shootings, but public confidence is what we're talking about here. And unfortunately, things have gotten to the point where we have to have that independent oversight. The last thing that I would say is this. We shoot 4 times a year, our officers do. There's police departments that only shoot once a year. If you look at SWAT teams, they deal with some of the most intense, most dangerous situations in law enforcement. If you will look at them, do you see how many times the outcome is where there's not someone who's seriously injured or killed? Sometimes it happens, but generally it doesn't. And the reason why is because of training. The sheriff can tell you, an entry team will do one entry over 100 times just to make sure they got it right if they don't get it right the first time. But the other thing is this. SWAT officers, for the mindset that they have to have when they're working, correct me if I'm wrong, they're some of the most compassionate and well-grounded people you will see. Why is that? Training, and then after every training day, every operation, you have what's called the throwdown. You fess up to your mistakes. You fess up to what you did wrong. And if you don't, your peers are going to call you out. And what happens is, over time, you develop into a team that does the right thing for the right reasons. I appreciate being here today. I hope that I will be able to interact with some more of you and see you in situations where we can talk about these things. And Dr. Chavis, I'm sure you recall the incident
Yes.
in Baltimore where an officer, a sergeant, had to kill his son
Yes.
He stabbed his wife with pruning shears.
Yes,
He had to kill his son. So that's not something that's happened. It's not something that's all that happens that often, but it does happen. And I'm just grateful for the fact that my son's still alive and we have a good relationship. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you for your testimony. Brother Rodriguez, next steps.
Just very quickly, I want to talk about the next steps. We've talked about trust between the community and law enforcement. So what's the next step to building that very important foundational piece of this puzzle? Systemic racism is the operation of racism embedded into organizations and institutions. We know that there is discrimination. There's been a history of discrimination in this country when it comes to education, access to educational resources, funding for our public schools. We know that there's been institutional racism when it comes to access to capital, redlining, and funds that are needed to start small businesses. We know that there is institutional racism that has affected the operation of our incarceration system. Arizona is either the 4th or the 5th highest state in rate of incarceration. And people of color are overrepresented in that institution. That goes back to our criminal justice system. That goes back to law enforcement contacting people on the street. So if we know institutional racism exists in our educational system, in our financial system, in our housing systems, law enforcement isn't special. It exists in our law enforcement system. So the next step, I'd like to see leaders like these gentlemen here and others who, and the second chief who was here, who's the second in the ranking in that organization. I'd like to see them get together with our community leaders and say openly, we acknowledge the existence of systemic racism in law enforcement, and we are here to help you solve it. We are here to identify it and root it out. And that will do wonders to build a bridge of trust between the community and law enforcement. That's the next step I would like to see.
Panel, let's give our members of the panel a hand. Thank you so much. Before closing, I just wanted to say, well, we're not going to close this forum. We're going to adjourn. The reason why we're not going to close is because we have some work to still do. I asked the first, I want to ask you, are each of you willing to first on some of the recommendations that have been made to improve community and police relations in this county and in this city and in this state? Would you be willing to work? together? All right. Thank you. Let's give him another hand. Thank.
Keep your seats, gentlemen. Keep your seats, please. Keep your seats. Keep your seats. Thank you, Dr. Chavis. Thank you to our panelists. Please keep your seats. We have about 10 minutes, and we will adjourn in about 10 minutes. First, I want to thank you all for taking 3 hours out of your day to be with us. So for our viewing audience across the United States, I just want to share that in this room, we have mayors, we have police chiefs, elected officials, high-profile community leaders, Randy Kindred, owner of a major sports team. I just want to make this announcement. In the back of the room, through those doors, we have a video camera, videographer set up. We want each and every one of you, before you leave, just take 30 seconds. Go back there, give us your name and title, and if you want to share some comments with us about today's forum, please do that as well. So I want each and every one of you in the room to go through those doors, state your name, your title, and if you want to share comments, we invite that as well. So please do that. Secondly, I just want to let you all know before we get to closing comments, these bridge forums are not just conversation to have a conversation. I just want to acknowledge in the city of Scottsdale, they made 28 changes as a result of a bridge forum that we held there. And they actually, it's documented. There's a book online of the findings. So I just want to give kudos to Mayor Lane and Chief Rod Bell for making those changes. And me and AP talk about it. We said that's probably the reason why Chief Rod Bell was named Chief of the Year. So we don't know, but it could be, Chief. We don't know. So I just want to say thank you for that. We also are talking with communities across the United States about bringing a bridge to their communities. We're in conversations with our mayor of Mesa, John Giles, who's here with us today. We are going to continue those talks and see if we can work out the details to have a forum in the East Valley. So thank you for being open to the possibility for that, Mayor, and other leaders across the United States. So before we leave, we have the honor of having the Arizona Speaker of the House, Rusty Bowers, here with us. And we've asked him to come up and just share some perspectives from the position of the state of Arizona. Rusty, if you can come on up. Let's just welcome him before we get to closing remarks. Rusty Bowers.
I think I'm better with a mask on my face, my whole face. I jotted down some notes. One of my favorite quotes about horses, that a creature can't learn that which its heart has no shape to hold. As I thought about racism, why does racism have to have a preliminary word in order to be something important enough to address? Racism has no place in any heart, in any institution, in any application, anywhere on earth. It has no place there. It's a canker in whatever that is. But racism is a heart disease. And I think of what we do generally that might cure that disease. I happen to wear this tie. Seriously, unplanned. I just like the tie. But in the tie is a picture of 3 of my grandchildren. This is Ezekiel. He's Chadian and Kenyan. This is Janie. She's Filipina and Hispanic. And this is Leo. Leo is, what are they? In vitro. 3 wonderful children, my little mini part of my United Nations, where they are being raised in a family whose heart is changed and accepting and loving and gives great opportunity. I would hope that also racism is pardonable. Mr. Bolding and Mr. Rodriguez also sponsored legislation about expungement of records as part of a criminal justice reform. And I thought about that in the terms of racism. Can someone who broke the law in some way ever be forgiven by society? Or is every infraction of law, obviously of a serious nature, a life sentence? I would hope not. Otherwise, our justice reform measures are doomed to failure. Is racism the same way? Is it pardonable? Can someone who 40 years ago was a racist, and what does that mean? Are there degrees of that in the heart? Is it like plaque that can build up a little bit at a time until it's fatal? Can it be reversed? Can it be cleansed as a heart disease? Likewise, that is our enterprise. That is our enterprise, to change the heart till it is no longer accepting of that disease in it. I'm grateful to be here. Jameer Miller and his brother, Hassan, have been good teachers of mine and are entering into an enterprise that you'll hear about as well with this task force and others. There's a lot of people that know that this moment can't be lost. And I would hope that it is not lost, that how it's reflected in all of our hearts, the communal heart as well as the individual, will not be lost. Thank you.
Thank you, Rusty. When I hear a microphone pop, my PTSD shows through, being a Gulf War veteran. These are our closing remarks. I just sincerely want to thank all of you. I can't thank Dr. Chavis enough for flying in from across the country to be with us today. I want to really thank our sponsors, our panel participants, all of you, the Arizona Foundation Board of Directors, and especially Alan A.P. Powell and Aaron Baer for their vision. As the Arizona Foundation responds to events happening in communities across our nation, stay tuned, because we may be coming to a city near you. We're going to capture the information shared here today and prepare it for review for future use. These days that we're experiencing right now is in the books. It is part of our history. This forum today will archive this moment in our history. The big question is, will we go down in the history books on the right side of doing the right thing right here, right now? Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to our viewers on live stream watching us across the country who joined us. God bless you all, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you for coming.